When you think of the biggest Nintendo trends, what do you think of? Pokemania? The Wii? These were events that quite literally took the world by storm. They were unavoidable. What if I told you that Animal Crossing New Horizons also fits in that category? I know, Animal Crossing, the least action-packed, most wholesome series managed to captivate millions around the world. Enough time has passed since the phenomenon, so I'd like to view this period of time as a case study. I don't want this moment in video game history to be left behind. So let's take a deep dive into how exactly New Horizons became the game of 2020, or quite frankly, the life raft of 2020. But to understand what made it popular, it's important to remember how we got here in the first place. It's weird to think that Animal Crossing is a relatively new series, born in the new millennium, yet still holds an impressive legacy behind it. Like many exciting concepts, the franchise was born out of everyone's favorite feeling, loneliness. Before Animal Crossing, a man named Katsuya Eguchi moved from his hometown Chiba to Kyoto to work for Nintendo in 1986. He built up an impressive resume from the get-go, designing for Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World, and even became a director for Star Fox. But in this transition, Eguchi felt incredibly lonely because he had essentially left his friends and family behind. Chiba and Kyoto were incredibly far apart, so even when he did come home, it would be too late or the family was just playing games separately. He wanted to share the same gaming experience with his family, even if they were playing at different times of the day. So Eguchi sought to recreate that sense of community that he was missing, and thus the idea of Animal Crossing was born. Animal Crossing features three themes: family, friendship, and community. But the reason I wanted to investigate them was a result of being so lonely when I arrived in Kyoto. Chiba is east of Tokyo and quite a distance from Kyoto, and when I moved there, I left my family and friends behind. In doing so, I realized that being close to them, being able to spend time with them, talk to them, play with them, was such a great important thing. I wondered for a long time if there would be a way to recreate that feeling, and that was the impetus behind the original Animal Crossing. Katsuya Eguchi. So from the very beginning, the franchise strives to cultivate that sense of community, and for the most part, each entry ties back to that fundamental in some way. Since this is less about covering the entire series, this will be a brief overview of the games leading up to New Horizons. The very first title released for the N64 in 2001 called Dobutsu no Mori, which was remade worldwide as Animal Crossing for the GameCube in 2002. It was very unique. Nothing like it at the time, not even The Sims. Wild World released on the DS in 2005. It was portable fun and refined the formula. City Folk released on the Wii in 2008. It was basically Wild World Plus, but was criticized for being too derivative. New Leaf released on the 3DS in 2012, which reinvigorated the series by introducing fresh new ideas. And then a few spin-offs released after New Leaf with varying degrees of reception. Animal Crossing has mostly been a consistent franchise, all things considered. Many of the holdovers, aesthetics, and characteristics have remained the same since the first game. Even before New Horizons, Animal Crossing had already proved to be a successful franchise, earning a sizable amount of fans over the years, including myself. So when the Switch released in 2017, people were hungry for a new entry, wondering what new features would come to the franchise. How would the new game be the true next step in the series? Ultimately, it took 8 years until a true successor to New Leaf arrived on the scene, and the lead up to the release was something to behold. I'm sure many of us remember this moment, but our first ever hint of New Horizons was not in its own trailer, but a Smash reveal of all places on September 13th, 2018. At the end of a lengthy Nintendo Direct, Isabelle appeared, and fans thought that it finally meant a new Animal Crossing, but not so fast. It was actually a fake out. Turns out that Isabelle was joining the Smash Ultimate roster. Oh, okay, cool, I guess. But Nintendo, being as slick as they are, tacked on another surprise. Tom Nook inconspicuously elaborated on Isabelle's invitation, and then it came true. A simple splash screen appears with the Animal Crossing logo, and the year 2019 just below it. I think they meant to round up, so I'll only take a few points off. To this day, I still can't believe they had the nerve to just double cross us like that. It was exciting though. The next big splash of information arrived during the E3 2019 Direct on June 11th, 2019, when Nintendo revealed the new title as Animal Crossing New Horizons. Not unlike New Leaf, this trailer introduced the premise of a fresh start, but this time on a completely deserted island. Right out the gate, there were several new mechanics being shown, one of them being the crux of this game: crafting, placing furniture outside, pole vaulting across rivers, picking up entire trees with a shovel, placing paths, multiplayer with up to 8 people. There was so much new being thrown at us. It was a lot to take in. And of course, the reveal of the infamous new release date, March 20th, 2020. If only we had known back then. Overall, this was a pretty beefy reveal, considering that we basically had no visuals, screenshots, or titles to speculate beforehand. There was definitely a lot of new stuff to excite fans, including myself. I remember I was the most hyped about placing furniture outside. I wanted nothing more than to make the outside just as pretty as my house, which is something that we couldn't fully do yet, besides public works projects in New Leaf. It truly felt like the next step of the franchise, to give players a greater sense of customization. No demos yet at E3 though, so we only had the trailer to overanalyze and speculate what else we could do in the game. The next reveal was, yep, another Nintendo Direct on September 4th, 2019, almost a full year since the initial teaser. This time, the video focused on expanding what was shown at E3, which was a smart move. I can't tell you how many trailers for other games that would reintroduce mechanics we already knew, because they didn't have much new stuff to show, only to have the game be subpar at best when it releases. Not naming names. What I mean by expanding is a deeper look into crafting, the ability to move outside furniture, eating fruit in order to pick up trees, and 8 players in both local and online multiplayer. All things teased in the initial trailer. Moving on to the actual new stuff, they showcased the beginning of the game and what you'll be doing on the deserted island. Super simple stuff. And then something completely new was the introduction of the Nook phone and subsequently Nook Miles, another key feature of this game. This shows how much the franchise is catching up to modern times with smartphones and connectivity, which will definitely play a part in the impending craze. And after a slew of new features, series staples were shown as if they were like, don't worry, this is still the Animal Crossing you know and love. Fishing, bug catching, seasons, weather, and flowers all make their return. I know this doesn't sound like much, but it's important not to immediately alienate veterans by only showcasing the new. When a franchise like The Sims can't even guarantee seasons to just be a part of the base game, you know, something that actually occurs in real life 24/7, it's comforting to know that the developers know what to keep as staples. It felt like anything was now possible. No more limitations on what we could do with our islands. Mind you, this was before terraforming was even revealed, so we were truly in for a surprise. Strangely, the villagers kinda took a backseat in this video, only delegated to a few shots, but I get it. They wanted the player to be the main focus. Surely they'll give a spotlight to the villagers later down the line, right? February 20th, 2020, exactly 1 month before the game releases, and we got a 27-minute direct dedicated to just New Horizons. Long story short, it's diving deeper into the gameplay details. Are we surprised? The direct details the start of the game even more. A couple of returning characters are shown like Wisp and Gulliver. Now on to the actual new stuff. Home decoration is vastly improved, very nice. Mystery islands are a thing, which give players more chances to gather resources and recruit villagers. I like how they say,
"We're certain these tours will prove to be one of our most popular services, leading to many repeat customers."
Cause they were certainly right, but I assume not in the way they intended. It was also announced that free updates will be coming in the future. That surely won't age poorly. And this is the moment that God Mode was revealed, forever changing the trajectory of Animal Crossing and what we know of it for eternity. It's also called terraforming or whatever. In hindsight, this direct feels very sluggish because we all know this now, but at the time, this was all new information, so I'm sure we ate it all up. I suppose this direct did exactly what it needed to do. Not much else to comment on. So this isn't related to new information directly from Nintendo, but I want to take a detour and remember the Doom and Animal Crossing crossover. I almost forgot about this meme, but this is definitely worth preserving in history. For those who don't remember, Doom Eternal and New Horizons were both slated for March 20th, 2020. The internet ran with this complete juxtaposition of these two franchises, a gory rampage versus peaceful island life. Soon enough, Twitter and Reddit were beaming with Isabelle and the Doom guy joining forces. So I should mention that technically the Switch version of Doom Eternal didn't release until December, but regardless, the meme prevailed. I thought I'd share this little moment before the release of New Horizons. It's a rare instance of the internet sharing something positive and funny that I feel shouldn't be forgotten. But anyway, let's move on to the final pre-release moment. From February 20th to March 1st, 2020, right before everything shut down, PAX East held New Horizons as one of their flagship titles for guests to try out. For the first time, this game was playable to the public and Nintendo knew that, so they built an entire booth that looked like you were on a tropical island. They were really hyping this game up and the budget shows. Fruit trees, a crafting table, a house, a fire pit, a bridge over a fake river, a tent, everything that would make you feel like you were in the game, they had it. And at the demo booths, guests finally got to experience the game. It was essentially showcasing local multiplayer, which I kind of forget exists. It was probably intended to have more people on one demo unit. We had a glimpse of the Nook Mile system, something that would haunt our gameplay forever. The footage was very Animal Crossing TM. I was definitely not jealous. I easily could have gone, but I didn't want to miss college classes. I kinda wish I went, but I didn't know that PAX East was gonna be one of the last in-person events for a long while. So, oops. Funnily enough, my college roommate at the time did go to the convention. He was also hyped for New Horizons, so that's neat. And now, we have to talk about it. March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization officially declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. This quirky little thing happened where the entire world shut down, everyone had to quarantine, and entire lives were halted. I'm sure we all remember that. Not fun at all. Speaking from personal experience, I was in the middle of my spring break when this all happened. I was supposed to return to school the following week and play the new Animal Crossing game with everyone on campus. Yeah, that didn't happen. Since I was in vacation mode, I was like, okay, I guess. Extended spring break it is. At the time, I didn't register the severity of the news. I was very much in denial and disbelief, as I'm sure everyone else was. Little did I know that it was going to be the last time I'd see the real world for a while. Problem was, New Horizons still hadn't been out. We all had to wait until the 20th to get our hands on it. Those 9 days of waiting felt excruciating. Never in my life was I begging for a game to release sooner as much as New Horizons. Mario Maker was a close second, not just because I wanted to play it, but because I wanted to escape this new terrifying pandemic reality. But finally, on March 20th, 2020, millions of people would turn to this new life simulator as a ticket to escape the mess that is planet Earth, and thus concludes the lead up to New Horizons, and now begins the Animal Crossing craze of 2020. Funny thing, New Horizons was a modest success at launch. A mere 11.37 million copies sold worldwide in the first 11 days. 11 days! 31.18 million copies worldwide by the end of 2020. And just for good measure, as of this video, it's one of the best-selling Switch games of all time, second only to the untouchable god that is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. There was actually a point in time where there were Switch shortages, and and the high demands for New Horizons didn't help. Need I say more? But all of these numbers don't mean anything if people don't resonate with the game. Luckily, this game secured that right out the gate. It should be no surprise that every gaming outlet and the majority of the internet was praising this game to no end. 1, because it was by far the most anticipated game of 2020, and 2, this game served as a savior from lockdown. What do you do when you can't live a normal life? You live a better virtual life. Near perfect ratings across the board. It's also important to note that the game was fully functional at launch. No infamous game-breaking bug that set the internet on fire, declaring the game unplayable. In a perfect world, every game would release with no obvious glitches, but considering that we just entered a pandemic where everything halted, I consider that a very lucky break for New Horizons. So what happens when you mix the most anticipated game of the year and a population that is quite literally starving for connection? You get what I can only describe as Animal Crossing mania. When I tell you that Animal Crossing was everywhere on the internet, I'm not joking. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. If it wasn't about COVID, every corner of the internet was just bursting with Animal Crossing everything. More specifically, I'd like to highlight the YouTube side. Before, Animal Crossing on YouTube wasn't exactly niche, but it also wasn't popular per se. However, in 2020, it might as well have been a permanent slot in your recommendations. If you had any interest in the series, there were so many kinds of Animal Crossing content across YouTube. Let's plays, island tours, discussion videos, skits, pretty much everything you could think of mixed with New Horizons gameplay. I remember seeing YouTubers I would have never expected to touch a Joy-Con ever suddenly getting in on this trend, enjoying the game. It was wild and low-key, very heartwarming to see. And naturally, when something is extremely trendy and popular, the articles start flying in. When the New York Times is posting about it, you know you made it. I'd like to highlight this particular article called "Animal Crossing is the perfect way to spend quarantine." A very 2020 headline. I downloaded Animal Crossing New Horizons on a recent Friday night and named my island Akbar, in honor of the neighborhood bar my friends and I frequented before the quarantine. One of my fellow island dwellers, a small cat named Rudy, greeted me with a present. "This denim hat," he told me, "is so Akbar." How did he know? It's those little personal moments that seem to hook new players in. I found it interesting how this author described the premise of Animal Crossing so that anyone unfamiliar with the franchise could get on board. It just shows how much of a hot topic this was at the time. Was it Pokemania levels? No, but still very popular. The bases had to be introduced to the general public. And of course, social media was primed to keep the buzz alive. But it's rare that so many non-gaming news sites published articles surrounding the game as well. Pretty much the entire world was now immersed into the Animal Crossing community, sinking hours into the game. A range of social groups sprouted in order to play the game together, ranging from kids to peers to adults. Because of COVID canceling real-life events, many of those were substituted for a session in Animal Crossing. Birthdays, Christmas in July, weddings, you name it. I even found an actual scientific report that studied the relationship of anxiety and isolation with Animal Crossing. If I had more than 2 brain cells, I would understand what all this means. What I'm saying is that Animal Crossing reached all parts of the world, point blank. Past the general hype, there were actually subtrends that have also contributed to this initial trend. Subtrends that only people who are truly playing the game a lot would understand, which still met millions of players. If I could point to the #1 thing that is emblematic of the digital age that we're in, I point to the creation of Nookazon. Remember how this game was released during the pandemic? Yeah, the collapse of the world also meant the rise of online shopping, aka Amazon. I'm sure Jeff Bezos was not struggling at all during the spring of 2020. Much like how Animal Crossing imitates real life, players around the world were selling and trading items online, so why not capitalize on that demand and create a service that imitates the most powerful e-commerce site in the world? So on April 9th, 2020, 25-year-old software developer Daniel Liu and a couple friends created Nookazon, a hub designed for trading and selling items in New Horizons. What a world we live in. Personally, I never used Nookazon because I'm stubborn and grind for items the hard way, but even I caught wind of Nookazon. I thought it was extremely impressive how quick of a creation this was. Like, I wish I had the brain cells to somehow program and design a modern website in response to a game that was released a month prior. I could never. Judging by how it's still up and running, I think it's safe to to assume that it satisfied the demand. This website isn't trying to scam you into spending real-world money to get the items you want. The currency is in-game, usually bells or Nook Miles tickets, and players achieve this transaction by visiting one of their islands and making the exchange. If anything, I applaud this kind of creativity for something as simple as trading items. This isn't like the 2000s where you would wait for someone to respond to your requests on a forum, exchange friend codes, and pray that they actually show up and have what you need. We're in the 2020s where external services are as streamlined and safe as possible. I know this seems like I'm just trying to promote Nookazon, but I'm genuinely impressed by this idea. It plays into our increased focus on online consumerism in real life. Is it concerning that society has led up to this kind of demand? A little, but it's an interesting point in time. This creation could only have happened with Animal Crossing and a pandemic. In the same vein, the rise of the turnip market was also a notable trend. This is nothing new in Animal Crossing, and this was obviously an intended feature in New Horizons, but it just fed into the buzzing online community. Suddenly, you have millions of options to sell your turnips. Even I remember asking a few friends and swiftly flying over to turn a profit. It was a good dopamine boost. I definitely think the ease of dodo codes helped fuel the hot topic of turnip prices. Now here was a subtrend that could have only happened in New Horizons. Villager hunting. The reason that Nookazon treated Nook Miles tickets as currency is because they were your chance to invite any villager that you encountered, where previously, you just hoped that a decent villager moved into your town. Players now have the chance to roll the dice and recruit their dream villager. People dedicated entire sessions of cycling through several mystery islands just to score that one villager they've always wanted. Or if they were fed up with tickets, they could convince another player to have their villager move into their island. It might as well have been treated as a sport, but amiibo cards were when players got serious. If they were on Mystery Island 224 and they still haven't found Punchy, suddenly that amiibo card of him looks very alluring. Animal Crossing amiibo cards were also nothing new. They were first sold in 2015 with that game, but they experienced a surge in popularity because players could essentially pick and choose who lives on their island, if they could afford it. As with any collectible, not every amiibo card was valued equally. Sure, you could find plenty of amiibo cards out there, but it was the elusive cards that caused a frenzy, specifically Raymond. Now, personally, I never understood why this one villager was so popular, but based on what I've gathered, it's because of his looks and personality. I'm sure it's much deeper than that, but most of the time, players were projecting their own imaginations onto Raymond. The internet ran with it and he basically became an icon. And of course, what's an Animal Crossing game without showcasing your beautiful town to your friends? Except this time, it's for the entire world to see. Gone were the days of just showing off your pretty house and fancy path that you laid out across your town. Now you have an entire island to brag about. It's pretty obvious that New Horizons puts a huge emphasis on aesthetics, more than the previous titles. And the polished graphics and terraforming truly drive this home. Especially woven into the rise of social media, island and house tours exploded across the internet. It wouldn't take long to come across some frankly unreal pictures that barely look like Animal Crossing islands across your feed. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list of every single New Horizons trend. These are just the ones I felt that needed to be highlighted. But rest assured, this was literally all the internet was talking about for a few months. I think of the Animal Crossing craze as a parallel to the Pokemon Go phenomenon from 2016, but they had the opposite impacts. Pokemon Go encouraged players to go outside for once when people were spending too much time indoors. New Horizons encouraged people to meet up virtually when they couldn't meet outside. They both fulfilled a certain connection that was missing in people's lives. But unfortunately, as all things that go viral, not everyone will view this game in the same light of optimism as before. I don't think any franchise that blows up in popularity is free from any criticism or backlash. More players mean a broader range of tastes and opinions, and not all of them are favorable. New Horizons undoubtedly brought a lot of much-needed modernization to the series, but those same tweaks and additions were also contentious points for some players. The first one being the gameplay. Remember how the promotional videos leading up to the release didn't really feature the other villagers? Well, it's because they truly took a backseat, like the the whole game. While the player gained a ton of power and control over the island, it wouldn't take long until the other villagers felt like secondary characters rather than mutual friends. Many players also noticed the flattening personality of villagers to exacerbate this issue even further. Sure, they now do various activities on their own to seem more lively, but they serve no other function than to be a spectacle. The overall bland dialogue didn't help much either. The villagers in older games carry the dialogue through their unique and flamboyant conversations, but now, villagers always seem to love your existence, no matter what. They've become very agreeable, to a fault. I know that dialogue is such an ambiguous thing to assess, but when you're 500 hours into the game and you don't remember what any of your villagers said that day, that is clearly a problem. And because of that lack of interesting dialogue to go off of, players naturally turn to the villagers' appearance. What kind of animal were they? What was their face like? What clothes were they wearing? This led to them becoming more of a prop instead of a believable character. Cooler looking animals were upheld and the uglier ones were outright ignored. Soon enough, it felt like players were showing off their villagers as the ones who passed the beauty contest. Besides the animals, many players also scrutinized other mechanics. On top of the bland dialogue, you also have too much dialogue. For a game that modernizes a ton of other mechanics, clunky menu options like visiting islands or redeeming Nook Miles seem a bit outdated. Even the new features faltered a bit. Terraforming is somehow the slowest thing imaginable, crafting things only one at a time is a crime against humanity, tools somehow break faster than weapons in Breath of the Wild, which is impressive. The RNG of DIYs and villager hunting made the game feel a bit grindy. Many hiccups that are tolerable on their own, but add up to more frustration than some people would like. But at least those made it into the game at launch. When the game first released, several of the series staples were clearly missing. Legacy characters such as Cap'n, Katrina, and Brewster were nowhere to be seen at launch. Even some hallmarks from the previous game, New Leaf, like Reese and Cyrus and diving, were notably missing as well. Not even the iconic gyroids were anywhere in the game. Now I know that you know that a lot of these missing features would eventually be added back in future updates, but I'll touch on that topic a bit later. We must remember the fact that during the peak of the craze, many new players didn't get to experience some things that added to the Animal Crossing charm. You can introduce as many new mechanics as you want, but if the foundation isn't fully there, the new additions start to feel a bit frivolous. When you introduce more power to the player, it's important to make it as seamless as possible. Fall short, and it starts to feel like a distraction rather than an upgrade. I remember coming across a fan-made trailer called "Imagine Animal Crossing with the quality of life features we actually want." Apparently, players were so fed up with the clunkiness that they created their own ideal update. I loved that pettiness. I watched it and it made me very sad that it wasn't real, because it would have made the gameplay so much cleaner. And sadly, many of these wishes were never fully addressed. Going back to New Horizons being intertwined with social media, the dark side of aesthetics were also included in the package. As beautiful as those island and house tours are, it was very much style over substance. It can quickly start to feel like a beauty contest. Some players thrive in that competition, while others start to feel like their island is trash. You were encouraged to spend hours curating the perfect island to show off, while the others fell by the wayside for the sake of island beautification. Some players also clearly took pride in their villagers, almost like trophies or bragging rights. This makes sense because of the flat dialogue, so people only had the looks to go off of. It doesn't help that the amiibo cards exemplified the hierarchy, essentially commodifying villagers. I'm sure it's everyone's favorite hobby to compare and despair. It runs rampant in all avenues of social media, but it's especially true in New Horizons. When your timeline is flooded with outstanding islands and homes, with the perfect villagers running around, you can only admire for so long until you reach a point of inadequacy. At some point, customization comes at the cost of self-esteem. Normally, I'd always cheer for customization in games, but with something as expressive as New Horizons, some islands naturally outshine others, and when you come across dozens of islands that look way more elaborate and decorative than yours, you can't help but wonder if you're doing enough in the game. How much creativity and time you have reflects on your island, and nobody wants to see a raggedy empty island, right? I'm sure at one point, we all thought our islands looked garbage because of the bombardment of beautiful islands online. In the older games, islands looked more or less the same across the board, barring some custom patterns. There were less stakes to compare because the gameplay didn't rely on aesthetics as much. For many players, New Horizons felt like less of a life simulation and more like Minecraft. Crafting, building, shaping the landscape, the comparison is uncanny. Nothing is wrong with Minecraft-like mechanics, but for a series that started as a strive for community, the huge emphasis on expression steers the experience into something more competitive. How much time can you dedicate to make your island pretty? Have you decorated enough? If your island isn't show-stopping, is it even worth living on it? Another contentious topic for many players was time traveling. Because this game relies on the actual time in the real world, you cannot roll around at the speed of sound. You have to wait for things a lot. This is nothing new for Animal Crossing. Some players have always time traveled throughout the series to get what they want, but because of so many new players picking up this game, it sparked a bit of a controversial divide on the internet. You had players who looked down on people who manipulated the clock because it messed with the natural progression of the game, and then you had players who simply didn't want to wait and just wanted to know what the game had to offer all at once. The reason I bring this up is because I remember seeing videos and online threads centered around this debate. From what I've gathered, the crux of the issue was people complaining online that there was nothing else to do in the game, when it was clearly shown that they changed the clock to grind out every possible event. On one hand, yeah, it's quite annoying to see someone complain about a game having no content when they treat it as a grind fest instead of a daily check-in. On the other hand, it could also show that even the day-to-day activities still don't feel substantial enough to come back to. People only cheat the clock if they feel like the wait isn't justified, aka the gameplay loop isn't satisfying enough. Despite releasing at the perfect opportunity, a pandemic, I don't think time has been very kind to this game. In the beginning, everyone was experiencing the honeymoon phase of a new Animal Crossing game, but as the months pass, fans start becoming more critical of the game itself. I believe many factors contributed to this. Now here's where we face the hot topic of post-launch updates. Oh boy. I get it. Games today are gigantic. We're past the days when developers can just casually make a game within a couple years. With a game that prides itself on new additions and features, it's difficult to balance that with including the mountain of holdovers from past games. Remember that New Horizons was already delayed from 2019 to 2020, so clearly they needed a lot of time and resources to finish the game to their standards. So considering all of that, I still feel disappointed about the update rollout. Many players, including myself, felt like the updates either released way too late or brought back things that were already included in older games. And the technically new stuff was superfluous at best. Finally adding things back like diving and holidays were nice gestures, but were things that players were already accustomed to. Most of these updates came out months after the game released, way past the point where the player base was the most active, so only a fraction knew or even cared about the added content, which felt like such a missed opportunity. Again, I get it, we just entered a pandemic. I'm sure development slowed to a crawl, but withholding entire holidays until the next update really undermines the incentive to keep checking back on the game. And I'm not even talking about people who time travel. The general new player wouldn't have known to check back on times like Halloween for a special event, because it was never specified in the game at launch. On top of that, newcomers never got to experience the special characters that truly add to the game's charm, in a way that island customization could never accomplish. Now we have several players believing that Animal Crossing is nothing but a constant grind fest, when the series is so much deeper than that. Those special events and characters are what make the monotony worth it in the end, and they're spread across the calendar so that you have a reason to check back throughout the year. Once you're done crafting your pristine island, what else is there left to do? And as time passes on YouTube, newer videos become a little more critical of the game, questioning if New Horizons really is the best game in the series, something that so many people claimed at the beginning. You have videos dissecting the game for what it really is, exposing the clunkier aspects, or things that are just flat out missing. Some argue that New Leaf is superior to New Horizons in many ways, which, you know, I'm not opposed to. I think people have conflicting feelings because this game was technically supported for a while. As of this video, it was pretty close to 2 years of support, most notably the 2.0 update, which Nintendo claimed was the last major free content update. very specific, I will give it to them. It was a beefy update. The remaining missing content was finally added back, like the Roost, and a bunch of special characters on Harvey's Island, Happy Home Paradise, which was a repackaged Happy Home Designer as paid DLC. As for the new stuff, cooking was added, which works the same as crafting. An entire new type of Mystery Island tour was available with Cap'n as your guide, and literally thousands of new items were also added to the game. It easily outdid every prior update for obvious reasons. More stuff is better, right? Isn't that what we wanted? Well, you have to consider the time frame. New Horizons released on March 20th, 2020. The 2.0 update released November 5th, 2021, more than a year later. I'm not gonna pretend that absolutely no one played this game during this time, but it was definitely way past the game's prime. Like, yeah, New Horizons eventually became packed with content, but in many ways, the damage had been done. At that point, many of the initial players had grown tired of the gameplay, because it lacked a lot of that core Animal Crossing experience that was already present in previous games. Those crucial deeper mechanics that justify returning to your town day after day. And even with the 2.0 update, many of the main complaints from the community were never fully addressed, such as clunky menus, bland dialogue, and lack of bulk crafting. Nothing that would require that much change. New Horizons is no doubt a game with a lot of content, but it also comes with design choices that start to change the fundamentals of the franchise. That's the trade-off with popularizing an IP. When you're trying to appeal to a broader audience, what elements must be removed or diluted to make it happen? Animal Crossing didn't start off as a smash hit. It was a relatively niche series compared to the likes of Mario and Pokemon. How do you appeal blatantly rude villagers to the general public? You don't. You round out their personalities to make them inoffensive. How do you sell the idea that you're a mere equal to your other villagers? You don't. You give players so much agency that they might as well run the town. How do you convince the average person that a true sense of belonging means putting an effort to engage with your community? You don't. You incentivize players to focus on self-expression and aesthetics, because that's what's upheld in our current climate. And that's ultimately the dilemma that Animal Crossing is now facing. When a franchise expands its fan base, how long does it take until something gets lost in the process? Something that is fundamental for players to keep returning to a series that captivated them. Okay, I know that last section ended on a sour note, but I don't think that New Horizons is the worst game in the series. I don't even classify it as a bad game. It sold extremely well for a reason. It did what it needed to do. Time just wasn't kind to it. Like everything else, the world's moved on and people had other priorities. But just for a moment in history, Animal Crossing was the universal life raft. Personally, I got into the franchise with New Leaf. I picked it up, not knowing much outside of Smash Brothers, with zero expectations. I instantly fell in love with the game, and it wasn't long until I was fully immersed in the Animal Crossing world. I quite literally played New Leaf every single day from 2015 to 2016. Every morning before going to school, I would squeeze in my dailies, and every night, I would grind bells on Tortimer Island. And in between, I would catch up with everyone in my town. It was the first time I truly felt a sense of community with my villagers. Some of them have remained in my town ever since I moved in. I will never forget how New Leaf made me feel, and I think it would be foolish of me to expect the same exact experiences in New Horizons. I definitely think the longevity of the game could have been handled better, much better in fact, but it served another purpose that was irreplaceable in my life, being an actual refuge from my own world, my reality. Similar to when fans in the past needed Animal Crossing to deal with their stressful lives, I and many others needed this game to cope with the world that quite literally shut down and everything was uncertain. I distinctly remember returning from spring break and going back to class for the first time on Zoom, when professors were trying to readjust for something they've never been prepared for. It felt like everyone was trying their best to remain calm and collected, despite the obvious anxiety. It was such a surreal experience that I can't fully describe. It felt like nothing was gonna be normal again, and in between Zoom classes, I was playing New Horizons, trying to regain some semblance of a peaceful life. It's hard not to get sentimental about this game. It really did save me from my anxieties of the world. Did I wish that everything would go back to normal? Yes, every day. But we all had that one game that brought us back to that sense of comfort, a reminder that no matter the circumstances, we all deserve to feel safe and secure. New Horizons was that game for me. I was able to grow online friendships because of it. I was finally able to feel like I belonged in a community, despite literally living in isolation, which, if you remember, is a fundamental part of this entire franchise. From the very beginning, there were countless nights of hopping on New Horizons, visiting a friend's island, and appreciating each other's company. Moments that I held closely while I had to say goodbye to the before times. This game represents a very specific moment, where the unthinkable happened. The whole world stopped and everyone was basically in house arrest. Nothing was certain and everything was scary. It wasn't like the old days where you didn't feel like going out. You couldn't go out unless you want to risk contracting a deadly disease. In the future, when the Switch is considered retro, New Horizons will go down in history as the definitive quarantine game, no doubt, but I don't believe anyone but us will understand what this game meant to a lot of people. We were all trying to maintain that human connection that was stripped from us. Whether you still play it to this day, fell off with it, got fed up with its mechanics, or never got into it, at one point, you saw an opportunity to escape to a better place. A place where everything was under your control, where you were finally allowed to relax and nothing scary could ever happen. New Horizons reminded me that making time for yourself is so important. In this fast-paced culture, we tend to forget the simple pleasures in life. There's a reason why touching grass is a thing, not just because of the memes. It's that simple act of appreciation that makes your day just a little easier. Escapism can be so important, especially when all other avenues of life have been stripped away from you. The height of COVID was the most extreme test of isolation and fear. So yeah, turning to a simpler, calmer life was what I really needed. I don't think any other games made me feel more at peace than New Horizons. New Leaf made me a fan, but New Horizons solidified my appreciation. I don't know what the future holds for Animal Crossing, but I know one thing's for sure. It will continue to serve a sacred role in people's lives. Community. Games can be an avenue for players to compete, blow off steam, refine their skills, but Animal Crossing has always been a refuge for people. Whenever things were a little too much to handle, whether it's from the 2000s or a literal global pandemic, the bombardment of horrible news starts to melt away, and suddenly, you feel like everything's okay. It reminds us that your surroundings may be out of your control, but no matter what, you'll always have a community waiting for you, welcoming you with open arms. New Horizons may not be the perfect game for everyone, but even for a moment, it might as well have saved the world.